UK PM says monarch is doing a fantastic job after protest by Senator in Australian Parliament. King Charles is doing a fantastic job, particularly in the context of his health challenges, the Prime Minister has said after the royal was heckled by the Indigenous Australian Senator Lydia Thorpe. Charles had just finished addressing MPs and senators at Parliament House in Canberra as part of his 5-day tour of Australia with Camilla when he was approached by Thorpe, who yelled, "This is not your country." After the launch of the public consultation on the future of the NHS on Monday, Keir Starmer was asked whether it was disgraceful that Australian politicians were heckling the King. Starmer said, "Look, I think the King is doing a fantastic job. An incredible ambassador not just for our country, but across the Commonwealth. I think he's doing a fantastic job, and we should remember in the context of health that he is out there doing his public service notwithstanding, the health challenges he himself has had. So I think he's doing a great job." Charles has paused his cancer treatment after his diagnosis in February, while he carries out his first tour as monarch to Australia and his state visit to Samoa. Starmer also praised the monarch as an incredible ambassador for the Commonwealth and said he was looking forward to joining Charles in Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, SHOCKS Summit. Thorpe had shouted at Charles, "You committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back. Give us what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land. Give us a treaty. We want a treaty in this country. You are a genocidalist." As Thorpe was ushered out from the hall, she added, "Give us a treaty. We want a treaty with this country. This is not your land. This is not your land. You are not my king. You are not our king." Thorpe later said in a statement, "The British Crown committed heinous crimes against the First Peoples of this country. These crimes include war crimes, crimes against humanity, and failure to prevent genocide. There has been no justice for these crimes. The Crown must be held accountable." When asked if Britain was guilty of genocide in Australia, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson said he would not be drawn on comments made in relation to royal matters, but he said Britain's relationship with Australia was fantastic and that it was a key ally. But No 10 said Starmer remained opposed to apologizing for the UK's historical role in slavery, with the spokesperson noting talks around reparations are not on the agenda for the SHOCKS meeting. "The position on apology remains the same," they said. "We won't be offering an apology at SHOCKS, but we will continue to engage with partners on the issues as we work with them to tackle the pressing challenges of today and indeed for the future generations." In an unexpected turn during King Charles II's state visit to Australia, the monarch was confronted by Indigenous Australian Senator Lydia Thorpe, who heckled him in Parliament House, Canberra. This incident stirred international attention, especially as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer stepped in to praise the King for his resilience, particularly highlighting Charles's ability to perform royal duties amid his health challenges. Starmer called Charles a fantastic ambassador, not just for the UK, but for the entire Commonwealth, acknowledging the significant public service he continues to deliver despite his personal struggles. The context of Starmer's remarks came after Charles had just finished a speech in front of Australian MPs and senators as part of his 5-day tour, which included visits with Camilla to several key locations. As Charles made his way through Parliament House, he was met by Senator Lydia Thorpe, who aggressively shouted, "This is not your country," accusing the British Crown of committing atrocities against Indigenous Australians. Her cries rang out, "You committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back." Thorpe's passionate protest echoed long-standing grievances related to Australia's colonial history, which saw Indigenous populations displaced and devastated by British settlers. Thorpe, an outspoken advocate for Indigenous rights in Australia, demanded that the British monarchy take responsibility for what she called heinous crimes against the First Peoples of the country, including war crimes and genocide. She called for the return of land and for a treaty that recognizes Indigenous sovereignty in Australia. Her protest was brief as security quickly escorted her out of the hall, but the resonance of her words left a mark on the proceedings. For many Indigenous Australians, the British Crown remains a symbol of colonial oppression and dispossession. Thorpe's comments were a reminder of the deep historical wounds that still affect the country's First Nations people. In her post-incident statement, she emphasized the ongoing impact of colonialism, accusing the Crown of not only past atrocities, but also the continued lack of accountability for these actions. The British Crown committed heinous crimes against the First Peoples of this country, Thorpe said. There has been no justice for these crimes. Despite the drama, King Charles, known for his calm demeanor, appeared unflustered by the encounter and continued with his visit. His focus on building strong relationships with Australia and other Commonwealth nations remains a key part of his role as monarch, especially as he navigates the sometimes complex legacy of British colonialism. Keir Starmer, when asked about the heckling incident, was quick to defend the king, praising him for his dedication to his duties in the face of health concerns. The Prime Minister's response was framed in terms of admiration for the king's stamina and service. I think he's doing a fantastic job, an incredible ambassador not just for our country, but across the Commonwealth, Starmer said, underscoring the diplomatic significance of Charles's role. The Prime Minister also alluded to Charles's health challenges, noting that despite the strain, the King continues to represent Britain on the world stage with dignity and grace. At 75 years old, King Charles has faced health issues, most notably his cancer diagnosis earlier this year. However, he temporarily paused his treatment to carry out his duties during this tour of Australia, and ahead of his visit to Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, SHOCKS Summit. His state visit to Australia marked his first major overseas trip as monarch, an opportunity for him to strengthen ties between the UK and its former colony, which remains a key member of the Commonwealth. The visit has been a mix of public appearances, speeches, and engagements with Australian political leaders, but Thorpe's protest highlighted the complex relationship between the British Crown and its former colonies, particularly those with large Indigenous populations. Thorpe's calls for reparations and a treaty reflect broader debates in Australia about its colonial past and the legacy of British rule. While Starmer praised the King, his comments on Britain's relationship with Australia were cautious. Downing Street avoided addressing Thorpe's allegations directly, with the Prime Minister's spokesperson sidestepping questions on whether the UK was guilty of genocide in Australia. Instead, the official emphasized the fantastic relationship between the two nations and described Australia as a key ally. The spokesperson also made it clear that there are no plans for Britain to issue an apology for its historical role in the exploitation and suffering of Indigenous populations. The thorny issue of reparations and historical accountability has often been brought up in Commonwealth discussions, especially as the UK grapples with its colonial past in places like Australia, India, and the Caribbean. But, as the spokesperson noted, reparations are not on the agenda for the upcoming SHOCKS Summit, which will focus more on contemporary issues such as climate change and global economic challenges. Nevertheless, for many in Australia, Thorpe's protest was a reminder that unresolved historical injustices continue to shape the country's national discourse. The demand for a treaty is not new. Indigenous leaders have long called for formal recognition of their sovereignty, and while Australia has made some strides toward reconciliation, many Indigenous Australians feel that more substantive changes are needed. Starmer's comments praising Charles can be seen as part of a broader strategy to maintain the monarchy's relevance in the modern Commonwealth, where debates about the legacy of British rule remain highly charged. The UK's refusal to apologize for its colonial past or to discuss reparations in forums like SHOCKS reflects the delicate balancing act that British leaders must perform as they engage with former colonies.